All right, you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm back with another one like the other one, and I'm going to get straight into it. But before I do, real quick, let me just say this. So there's a couple of you that have not tapped in that won the raffle. If you guys want the items that you won, you guys need to tap in with either me or Sandman and send us your mailing information. You can either get it me through my email, boxerparadigm@gmail.com, or you can get it sandman2702 at outlook.com. You guys need to send us your mailing information so that we can mail this stuff out. I don't like sitting on your guys' winnings. When you guys win, I like to get it out the next day. I like to be known for that. So you guys are kind of holding up, my program on the real, because I want you guys to get, your winnings as soon as possible. So don't make me look bad because you guys ain't getting your addresses to me. Get your address to us ASAP. With that being said, I want to thank everybody again for participating in the raffle. It was a good raffle. We had a good turnout. A lot of different people won, whereas like before in the past, we had one person that won 3 items, 2 people that won 2 items. This way it was spread out. So it was a good raffle. Anyways, I'm going to get into this next story. So this next story right here, it's another high drama. These stories just, it never ceases to amaze me, the stuff that goes on out there on these main lines. But this is another story that I think you guys are going to like. So this story right here happened on the cusp of that riot, that big riot that happened back in, I think it was 2001, 2002, somewhere around there between the Sureños and the Africanos. Right after that riot is when this incident took place. This happened around, I want to say, 2004, 2005. I might be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But I know that after that riot, they went on a lockdown, and it was a long lockdown. It was like a 3-year lockdown. Those of you that were there that know better, tap in and let me know how long that lockdown was. I know it was like 3 years or something like that. So I want to say this happened around 2004, 2005. And at that time, this was his yard. Tablas was controlling this yard. This was B yard in Pelican Bay. So, just to talk a little bit about what happened at that time, that incident that happened on B yard, it was and still is the biggest riot that has ever taken place in the history of Pelican Bay. That riot between the Sureños and the Africanos. And this is another story that I'm going to get into later. Even though it's been told 1,000 times, there's a lot of people that were there. And a lot of, different people have different stories. They have different perspectives. They play different roles. So, my source, he was there. He was involved in that riot. So I'm going to tell that story through his eyes, his experience. That's going to be for a later date. This right here, this is a different story. So let me get into it. So around 2004, 2005, right after the lockdown was lifted, everybody's out there on the main line trying to get resituated. You got to understand, this was a long lockdown, 2 or 3 years, and most of the perpetrators that were involved in the actual altercation, the actual riot, a lot of those guys had been shipped out. So, there's a lot of new faces. There's new people out there that are controlling these yards, and, all those people are gone now, but they're trying to reorganize. They're trying to get themselves reestablished out there. They're coming off the lockdown, and even though it's been a long time, the tension is still thick. Everybody knows that the last time we came out, there was a riot between the Sureños and the Africanos. One individual ended up getting shot out there. I had his name right on the tip of my tongue. He ended up getting shot and killed out there. Multiple individuals ended up getting stabbed. Like I said, it was one of the biggest riots in Pelican Bay history, in CDC history. So they're out there, they come out, everybody's trying to get situated. So, not only were they out there trying to reorganize and get themselves reestablished, with all these new faces, I'm sure that, they probably wanted to pull paperwork and make sure that everybody that, all these new faces out there, they probably wanted to do a screening process. That happens a lot. Maybe they didn't. But according to my source, that's one of the things that they did. I'm sure they had some kind of process that they did while they were locked down. They could still move kites. They still knew who was driving up, who landed in what building, and they were still screening cats. But still, you know, they get back out there, they're probably pulling paperwork, and they're probably just trying to find, you know, trying to get themselves rooted back out there on this mainland. So according to my source, who I'm now going to refer to as Psycho, Tablas was running this yard. This was his yard. He was still stuck in the shoe at that time. Everybody was still back there, but they had a line to him, and he was in control of this yard. This was his yard, B yard. At that time, two of Tablas's main buffers, his buffers out there, were Casper from the Drifters and Gordo from Crazy Riders. So at the time of this incident, Psycho was housed in A4, building A4. Buildings A1 and A2 were AdSeg, and building A3 was AdSeg overflow. So that's how the yard was set up. There was 4 buildings out there. Now, this story was primarily about an individual who they called Yoda from Westminster, OC. He was from Orange County. So at the time that he was involved in the incident that I'm about to tell you guys, he was not a made member. He was just a sureño, or he was a camarada, whatever he was, but he was not a Mexican Mafia member at that time. Later on, he would become a member, and he would be sponsored by Güero Caballo. And, you know, my source isn't 100% clear about this, but he seems to think that it might be Woody from Compton. I don't know. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But he's sure that Güero Caballo from Eastside 18th Street was the one that sponsored him. So Psycho, he said that Yoda was a different type of individual. He was a different type of character. I'm not sure what qualities he exhibited to the Mexican Mafia, but Psycho said that, you know, he was an odd individual. He ran hot, he ran cold. Sometimes he was in a foul mood. Sometimes, you know, he was good. You could never tell, you know, what kind of mood this guy was in. He was just one of those weird type of individuals. He described him as like a little Danny DeVito type of individual, but he was a rambunctious hardliner. He pushed a hard line. And he was somebody that didn't have no qualms about getting into the mix. If somebody needed to be stabbed, if there was work that needed to be put in, he was a lifer at that time. He was somebody that was always raising his hands, and he's always getting caught up in something. Like I said, Psycho described him as just an odd individual, but he was somebody that, you know, he also described as being like a J-Cat, a borderline J-Cat. He would just do weird things. You know, he didn't go into the details, but, you know, he'd be doing weird exercises, or he'd be walking the track, talking to himself. But when you talk to him, he was a sharp individual. He was just one of them kind of weird cats that was borderline J-Cat. So Psycho described Yoda is like a small guy. He was a small Danny DeVito type of individual, but he was a rambunctious type of dude that, you know, he pushed a hard line, and he was somebody that had no qualms about putting in work. You know, when it came time to hitting somebody or getting in the mix, he was somebody that would raise his hand. He was doing life, so, you know, he was one of those guys that just didn't care. If some work needed to be done, he was there. So Psycho said that Yoda, he ended up selling up with another one of those level 50 guys. And again, this is a term that he said that, you know, they were using up there in high desert. You know, the last story that I told you guys about high desert, that was his story as well. But obviously the level 50, it meant, you know, these youngsters that tried to act real hard, that were out there on the yard, low riding, walking the track. They had the hardest stroll on the yard, creased up pants 5 times too big, chanclas 7 times too big, walked around with one of them bunny rabbit keychains, a bunny rabbit keychain and a fedora with a blue feather, walking the track. And he had a hairnet on. That fool was out there riding. No, on the real though, this youngster that Yoda was sold up with, his name was Flaco. He said his name was Flaco, and he believes he was from Lopers. Lopers is another hood out there in Orange County. So like that other individual up there in high desert, he'd be walking the track with his chest poked out. But when it came time to put in work, and they actually approached this dude about putting in work, but like the other youngster, his thing was he had an appeal that was in the courts, and, you know, he didn't want to fuck that off. So he backed up like a yellow belly crawdad when they asked him to put some work in. So like I said, keep in mind that even though it's been an extended period of time since these guys have been on lockdown, there's still tension out there. And, you know, it doesn't matter how long the lockdown is. It could be 2 or 3 years, it could be 4 years. everybody that's locked up in those cells at that institution where it kicked off ground zero, they all know that the last time we came out to the yard, this is what happened. So there's tension out there. And one of the things that Psycho did say, though, is that a lot of the Sureños, because they knew like the week before they were coming out of lockdown, they knew that they were getting off. A lot of the Sureños were strapping up. They didn't know if there was going to be some retaliation. They didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know what their people had intended. So a lot of them were strapping up, getting ready for what was about to happen whenever they came off lockdown. And I'm sure the Africanos were doing the same thing. I'm sure, there was a heightened sense of awareness for them as well. And some of them were probably strapping up, in anticipation for something kicking off again. Like I said, somebody died out there. A lot of cats got stabbed out there. And, you got to remember what it all escalated over. Those issues, there could have still been a lot of residual effects out there. So it was what it was. When they finally did come off, there was a little bit of tension out there, but over time, everything just kind of just went back to normal. And like I said, a lot of that probably had to do with the fact that most of the perpetrators, the main ones that were involved that kicked that off, they were all gone. So I guess the week before they came off lockdown, they were still doing modified program where they would let the Sureños out, they shower, they let the Africanos out, and they would shower. Psycho said every time he would come out, he would stop by Yoda's cell, him and Flaco's cell, and they would be under the bunk, sharpening their pedazos, getting ready to come out, getting ready for what was going to happen that week. And it looked like he said, it looked like they were under there changing oil. You know how when you get up under a car, that's how they looked. But he said every time he would go by their cell, they'd be under there sharpening stock. And I guess there was some Crips from Bakersfield that lived like right next door. And he kept telling them, hey, bro, these guys can hear you. That shit's loud. They can hear everything you're doing. You're causing a lot of tension. But that's the kind of shit that Yoda was doing out there. He was older than Flaco. Flaco was a youngster. Yoda knew better, but he didn't care. He was like, I don't give a fuck. You know what I'm saying? I got to have my pedazo. I got to have it ready when I come out. You guys will understand as this story goes on what type of individual Yoda was. Little dude, but, a little dude with the pedazo, it doesn't matter how big you are. You got a pedazo, a bone crusher, it's all bad. So Psycho said a couple of days before they actually started opening the doors and letting these guys out to the yard, they ended up moving him to 8 building on A yard. And he said he ended up liking it over there anyway. The building that, Yoda was in, that building that he was in, A1, he didn't like that building anyway. So he said, when he got over to 8 building, he had some of his homies over there from his neighborhood. But, it was better being over there anyway, because his building was one of the first buildings to come out when they started doing yard release. So the way that they were doing it when they took them off lockdown was that they would let out one building at a time. You guys got to understand, this is a 180 design. So everything is sectioned off. And then you have like what are satellite kitchens in between each section, which I'll kind of explain for those of you that have never been to a 180, that kind of design. Like a 270 is wide open, but a 180 is blocked off. And then you have these little satellite kitchens that's where the workers go in and they feed like a section, and they go into those little kitchens one at a time. And that's how they feed the building. So they were only allowing out 7 inmates per CO. If they were short on staff, then there would only be a limited amount of, guys that they would let out to the yard. Sometimes their whole building wouldn't even make it out to the yard. This is how they started doing it the first couple of weeks after they came off lockdown. It was seven inmates per CO. So I don't know how this happened based on the fact that the Sureños and the Africanos were both involved in this riot. I don't know if they looked at, the Sureños as being the aggressors and they kept them locked down longer and they took them off modified program before they took the Sureños off. I don't know how this worked, but according to Psycho, he said that, during the lockdown, the Africanos were able to secure all the best jobs, all the good jobs, the jobs that had the high pay numbers. So by the time they came off lockdown, they basically had the whole yard sold up. They had all the good pay numbers and they had all the good jobs. So that right there caused some conflict. When everybody came back out, the Sureños, they felt like they were entitled to get some of those jobs. There weren't that many white guys out there on the yard. At that time, there was more Samoans than there was white inmates out there. That's crazy. But he said, believe it or not, there was actually more Samoans out there than white inmates. But the Sureños, when they get out, they come off lockdown, they feel like, a lot of them that are they don't got money on their books, they're indigent, they want those jobs, especially a lot of the lifers. They want those jobs that pay something, that means something to a lot of these guys that are locked up, that don't have no money coming in, that don't have family out there sending them money orders or putting money on their books, or they don't have means to take care of themselves. That little bit of help goes a long way. So A-Yard had the PIA, Prison Industry Authority. They had the optical, the laundry, and the main kitchen. And those were all good pay numbers. So like I said, everybody started vying for those jobs. And the Sureños were in the process of making a big push to get some of those jobs. This actually almost kicked off another riot just based off of this alone. Believe it or not, this is politics. This is politics at its best. You have one group segment that has all the good jobs. They have all the pay numbers, and nobody else out there on the yard has pay numbers. That's a problem. That's an issue. It doesn't matter, if they got those jobs and they fell into them because everybody else was on lockdown. That doesn't matter. The bottom line is, there's going to be an issue out there on the yard. The Sureños are going to get together with some of the Africanos, some of the more influential Africanos, and they're going to be like, hey, you're going to have some of your people step down. You guys got all the pay numbers out here on this yard, and that's not how it works. And it would be the same thing if the Sureños had all the pay numbers. The Africanos came out. It's the same thing. It's not a one-sided thing. It cuts both ways. The other thing I forgot to tell you guys is there were no Norteños on this yard at that time. Norteños were not allowed to walk this yard. Either they would come out there and they would get off, or they would come out there and they would get victimized. But there was no Norteños on that yard. So when this incident kicks off, Psycho's, he's working in optical. He's working in optical. It's at the end of his shift. The day is coming to an end. It's almost shift change. And he goes through work exchange. Work change is, for those of you that don't know what work change is, it's like when you're at the airport and you go through that security checkpoint and you have to take everything out of your pockets and put them in a bin, and that goes through an x-ray machine, and then you walk through a metal detector. That's what work change. I keep saying exchange, but it's work change. That's what it is. When you're coming out from those jobs, you have to go through those security checkpoints. And a lot of the times it's because, they're worried about guys bringing in, weapon stock and things like that. So, it's at the end of Psycho's shift that day. He's going through work change, and, he hits the yard and he sees Yoda out there. Yoda's in the area by the basketball court. And where he was at, there was, I guess the basketball court was split that day. The Africanos had half of it, the Sureños had the other half. But Yoda was just kind of posted up. He wasn't playing basketball. He was just posted up doing his thing. So, Psycho, he wants to go over there and say what's up to him. He goes over there to chop it up with him. Hey, what's up, homie? And he walks over there and he puts his hand out to shake Yoda's hand. And Yoda kind of puts his hand out and kind of half shakes his hand and brushes him off and spins off. So Psycho's standing there like he feels disrespected. He's like, what the fuck? You know what I'm saying? Like, the homie just straight disrespected me. I tried to shake his hand and he just brushed me off like I'm some kind of peasant or something. So Psycho's standing there trying to figure out what Yoda's up to. Because like I said, he runs hot and cold. He's lightweight J-Cat. So he's standing there trying to figure out what this cat's up to. Well, what Yoda does is he walks over to, there's like an entrance gate where the COs come into the yard and the COs leave the yard. Right at that time, when it was work change, it was also shift change. So there was a lot of COs that were coming in and a lot of COs were leaving from, last shift. So there was an excessive amount of COs on the yard. But what happened is Yoda posted up right there by the entrance gate, and he had one foot up, kicked up on the fence. So there was a CO named Amarty that was coming through the entrance. He was just coming on. It was his shift. It was the next watch. He was just walking through the gate. So Psycho said he's standing there still trying to figure out what Yoda's up to, and what happened next was completely unexpected. He said all he remembers is looking at Yoda, seeing him standing there, and when the CO Marty came through the entrance gate, he kicked off the fence, spun around, grabbed a handful of his jumpsuit, and started booking him. He had a nasty flat too. He said you could see the piece. It was a nasty flat. So Yoda's booking him. He's hitting him, spinning the CO around. The CO's trying to get away from him, but he's got a handful of his jumpsuit, and he's hitting him. You know, he's hitting him body shots. He's hitting him in the head. He's hitting him in the neck. And you know, Psycho tripped out. He was like, nobody knew that was gonna happen. Only a select few Sureños out there on the yard knew that was gonna kick off. So he's going in on this guy. He's booking the shit out of him. And you know, Psycho said he could see blood all over the CO. And at some point, the control, they obviously see what's happening. But there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of COs that are coming into the yard. They see what's happening as well. A lot of them start dropping their lunch bags, and they run over there to assist their colleague because he's getting stabbed. And you know, somehow they managed to get Yoda off of Marty, even though he had a piece. He probably heard the gun tower telling him to get down or he was going to shoot him. But Yoda, he ended up getting down on the ground. He proned out. And you know, these COs, they dogpile him, they kick the piece, they kick it away from him, and you know, they're on him. But at the same time, you got some other COs that are trying to pick up Amarty off the ground, because by that time he had fell on the ground. So Psycho said that, you know, he was proned out with the rest of the yard, and he's just watching now. He's like, man, this dude's fucking crazy. So the CO, Amarty, the one that got stabbed, so as soon as they help Amarty up, he tries to rush Yoda. You know, he's pissed off, and understandably so. He's leaking. He just got stabbed. He tries to rush Yoda, but Yoda's, you know, he's proned out on the ground. He's got handcuffs on, and there's other COs that are just trying to stop this guy. They're like, hey, man, you need medical attention. We need to get you to the infirmary. He took a couple of steps. He turned around, took a couple of steps, and that CO, Amarty, he passed out. He went unconscious. And it was from an excessive amount of blood loss. You know, it happened quick. Yoda got on him. He stabbed him. I want to say it was anywhere from like 11 to 14 times. It happened fast, but it was brutal. You know, he ended up hitting him in the stomach, in the arms. The CO got lucky. He didn't end up hitting him in one of his vital areas. He didn't hit him in his heart. He didn't hit him in the head. He didn't get like a brain shot, or, you know, in the neck where he would end up, you know, hitting him in the spinal cord or nothing like that. He got him bad, but a lot of the areas where he stabbed him, because he said he's seen the paperwork. You know, after you stab somebody, they give you a little diagram that shows the body where it was hit. Like a lot of the places where he stabbed him, they were just in areas where there were no vital organs, but he bled out a lot. He was leaking everywhere. You know, I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna say this right here. You know, when it comes to stabbing COs, it's not like they're off limits. If they get disrespectful and they make something personal, then, you know, something like this will happen. But usually every safeguard, every measure is usually taken to avoid having to resort to something like this, because the Mexican mafia, you know, the NF, the Aryan Brotherhood, they all understand that once you stab a CO, once you assault a CO like that, that there's going to be some repercussions. They're going to come in, they're going to tear up the yard, they're going to tear cells up, they're going to disrespect people. A lot of people are going to end up getting rolled up. It's that's going to cause a huge domino effect. A lot of people are going to lose contraband. Visits are going to get shut down. There's not going to be no dope coming in. There's a lot of there's a lot of a fallout that comes with something like this. But when you got a CO that continuously is disrespecting people out there on the yard, and he makes it personal, and he goes in, sells, and disrespects people's personal possessions and things like that, that's when you have to make an example, because if you don't, then it will just continue. So obviously this situation right here, it got so bad to where they felt like the only way to deal with this is to whack this dude, is to whack him, stab him. And violence sometimes is the only thing some people understand in prison. Unfortunately, being diplomatic, it doesn't work. You have to resort to violence, whether it's inmates, the officers that work in prison, they begin to develop a prison mentality as well. They're locked up just like the inmates. The only difference with them is that they go home at the end of the night. They go home and sleep in their own bed. But for the rest of the day, they're locked down. They're slammed down just like the inmates. So my point is they begin to develop that prison mentality as well. And sometimes you get some COs that just like inmates, the only thing that they understand is to resort to violence, is to take off on them and to do something like this in order for them to say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to do that no more. Or, to set an example. So the next CO that thinks he can get away with it, he won't do it. A lot of the COs that work there, that understand the politics in prison, they understand that, look, I can go to prison and there's 1,000 motherfuckers that I can fight with. If I want to go in there and be a tough guy and pick a fight with somebody, I can do it. But why am I going to go in there and create a hostile environment for these guys when everybody's already pissed off in prison? It's already a hostile environment. I'm just going to go in, put my 12 hours in, and get the fuck, get out of there and go home. Because at the end of the day, that's all a lot of them care about, is to just go home at the end of the day. So a lot of them, they get it. I've done time in a lot of different institutions, a lot of different prisons, a lot of different county jails. And every once in a while you'll run into a CO like this that will go into a cell, and you got your pictures taped up on the wall, and they'll rip the pictures, they'll just rip them off the wall, tear the corners off, pour your somebody's shampoo in their coffee, just go in there and just completely disrespect somebody's living area, disrespect their personal possessions, disrespect things that have sentimental value to them. And again, when you make it personal like that, there's plenty of people in prison that have no problem with setting an example like that. That's like the worst kind of disrespect you can get. So like I said, Amarty, he ends up passing out. He loses consciousness. He collapses on the yard because he's lost so much blood. They end up taking him to the infirmary. They bring out a gurney. They throw him on the gurney and they rush him to the infirmary. At that point, they started to process the crime scene. They considered that whole area over there a crime scene. But what they did is they started running in, the inmates off the yard. But what they did was they ran in all the Africanos. They ran in, the white guys that were out there, the Samoans. They ran all them in. And then they came out to the yard and they took all the cuffs off all the sureños and put zip ties on them. And they left them all laying there from the incident kicked off somewhere around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but they left them laying there until 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And Psycho said, he was like, Box, man, he was like, there were sureños that were out there, laid out for 6, 7 hours, that they were in so much pain, so much agony from having these handcuffs on, these zip ties, that they were pleading, they were begging for these guys to take them off. And I know the feeling. When I got into an incident in Susanville, they put us in the watch office and they had us handcuffed for around, I want to say it was 4 or 5 hours. And my shoulders hurt so bad that just trust me, I understand. And you know, I told you guys before, I need 2 pairs of cuffs. I got wide shoulders. 1 pair of cuffs doesn't work on me. Well, that day they gave me 1 pair of cuffs. And you know, when you got your arms behind your back like that, you're cuffed up. Your muscles, after a while, they start spasming out. They start spasming, and then it gets to the point where it hurts so bad because you know you're pulling your muscles back and they're in an awkward position that they lock up, and then you can't even feel them. When they finally do take the cuffs off, there's like it takes a while for the blood to get back in your arms and for you to be able to feel them and move. You literally, you know, to move your arms, you're swinging them around. I bullshit you guys not. I know there's a lot of you that have done time that are watching this, and you guys know what I'm talking about. If you've had a pair of cuffs on for like 6-7 hours, it's worse than Chinese torture. And I mean that. It'll make you plead with them to take them off. Just trust me. No, but these COs, they're not in no hurry to run these guys in. They're taking their time. They searched everybody one by one and they ran them in the yard one at a time. So it took a long time. While the Sureños were still out there, they're still laid out on the ground, they're proned out. They begin to process the crime scene. You know, they're out there, they got IGI out there, they got, you know, the investigative unit that's out there investigating that you know incident, and they're just leaving these guys laying there until they were done. So at this point, you know, once they process the yard and you know they get the weapon, and you know they do whatever they got to do out there as part of their investigation, then they started bringing in Sureños one by one. They start bringing them in the watch office and interviewing them one by one, because obviously when something like this happens, CDC, you know, a lot of times they'll slam down the whole system if they feel like, you know, there's a threat that's a universal threat that's going to go from institution to institution, or that something else is going to kick off again with another CO. You know, they'll go to extremes to investigate it, to get to the bottom of it, and to find out. And you know, they wanted to make sure that this incident right here was an isolated incident. It was just between Yoda and this CO. Later on, they would find out more about why it happened. But at least at that time, they determined that that situation was just between Yoda and that CO, that Yoda basically acted on his own accord, and that this wasn't a coordinated effort. So Psycho said, you know, he's out there, he's proned out, he's watching all these other Sureños go in. They're all going in, getting interviewed. They're coming out, they're escorting them back to their cells. He said when they called him in, he goes into the office and there's a you know, a sergeant in there. There's a couple of COs, and then there's this infamous Lieutenant Marquez. Everybody knows him. Everybody that's been to Pelican Bay knows who Lieutenant Marquez is. So when he goes in there, they start asking him about, you know, why that happened. Why did you know, inmate Mendez, which is Yoda's last name, why did he attack CO Amarty? Well, you know, what was this about? Was this personal? Is this something that you guys planned? And he asked him, he's like, you know, what do you think about it? What do you think about what happened to CO Amarty? And Psycho said that when he asked him that, he told him straight up. He said, man, fuck that punk ass motherfucker, man. And I'm going to tell you why he said that. Because when he told me that, I was like, come on, bro. But he's like, I'll tell you why I said that. So when Psycho said that, he said that Lieutenant Marquez walked over to him. He leaned down in his ear, got real close to him, and he said, if I find out you had anything to do with this, I'm going to come after your ass, and we're going to fuck you up. And he said he felt like he meant it, and he probably did. So obviously Psycho didn't say nothing else to Marquez. He felt like if he did, they would have bashed him right there. He said he just held his tongue, but there was a reason why he said that. So after they interviewed Psycho, they ended up taking him to ADSE because they considered him, or what they told him was they considered him a threat to the safety and security of the institution. Mind you, There was no 115. There was no incident report. There wasn't nothing like that. But CDC can do that. If they consider you to be a threat to the safety and security of the institution, that's like a standard thing that they say to put on a lockup order. They can use that right there. That's their go-to thing. So they locked him up with a bunch of other cats that they felt either had a little bit of influence or were part of their leadership. So obviously they also took Yoda to ADSE, and for whatever reason, he's not talking to nobody. He's not accepting no kites. He's not acknowledging nobody. They're trying to get at him. You know, other Sureños that are over there with them are trying to get at him, holler at him, and find out what's up. But he ain't accepting no kites. He's not acknowledging nobody. He's not talking to nobody. So now they're tripping on him. They're tripping on him. They got him locked in an area where he's behind solid doors, and you know nobody can really get to him anyway. You know, under the circumstances, this is highly unusual, and it's out of character for somebody to shut down and not acknowledge his own people like that. But you know, that's what he did. Later, it will come to light that the reason why Yoda took it upon himself to stab CO Marty was because this particular CO started disrespecting a lot of the Sureños on that yard and was making it very personal, like I told you guys earlier. And you know, this guy apparently he was working on C yard before he moved to A yard, and he was cool. There were a lot of Sureños over there on C yard that said, man, dude was straight. He was cool. He was somebody that was respectful. You know, they used to bullshit with him, but then something happened, something changed, and he just started, you know, he started pulling nutties on everybody. So apparently what happened was 6 months prior to this incident happening, when he was out there on B yard, apparently somebody found out that his wife had called him while he was at work and told him that she was going out to LA to see her mom. I don't know how they got all this information. I don't know. Maybe it came out in, you know, the IA reports later. I don't know. But apparently they found out that, you know, his wife had said that she was going to go to LA and visit with her mom. As soon as she gets out to LA, she files for divorce. And again, according to Cycle, the CO was cool until that happened. But that fucked him up. He never acted like that and was real respectful before this happened. So what he started doing was this. Keep in mind, I told you guys this is a 180 level 4 yard. It's a level 180 design. And part of that design includes what are called satellite kitchens. These are the small kitchens that I told you guys that are kind of like in between the sections. So just so you guys can kind of understand what I'm trying to tell you guys, let me try to break this down for you in simple form. So on a 180 between each block, let's just say between 7 and 8 block, there's a satellite kitchen that feeds those 2 blocks. And then you have, like, you know, 4 and 5, you got a satellite kitchen between those 2 blocks, and that kitchen feeds those 2 blocks. So, but here's the thing about it. When you're an inmate worker and you work in these satellite kitchens, you got to strip out before you go in there, and you got to strip out when you come out. And with this CO, what he started doing is when these guys would come to work and they would strip out in front of everybody, you know, there was a couple of white dudes at first that he started doing it with. So when they would start to strip down, he'd tell them things like, you know what, motherfucker, you ain't about shit. You a bitch, punk. You ain't gonna do shit. You ain't gonna do shit about it, punk. He's like, you think you're tough, but you ain't shit, man. I'll fuck you up. And a lot of these guys, from what Psycho was telling me, he was like, a lot of these guys were short. They weren't trying to get into it with this guy, and they were tripping on him. They were like, man, what's this dude tripping on? I'm not trying to catch no more time over this cat. He's fucking, this dude's looking for a fight, but I'm not gonna bite into it. These dudes are trying to go home. So a lot of them were just like, man, I'm not even tripping off this dude. But he started pushing more. He started doing that shit to the Sureños. He started doing it to the Africanos. And when they wouldn't do nothing, he'd be like, see, I told you you were a bitch. I told you ain't gonna do nothing about it. But then he took it a step further. Then he started searching cells. And like I told you guys, how, you know, some COs, when they go in the cells and they start disrespecting people's personal, you know, their personal effects, their personal possessions, that's what he started doing. He'd go in there, he'd throw the mattresses over the tier, he'd throw all their, you know, their good clothes, just start throwing handfuls of shit over the tier. mix their cosmetics up, step all over their soups, disrespect their beds, step all over their sheets, leave footprints all over shit. So, he started doing this. He started doing this shit to more and more people. And after a while, it got to the point to where they were like, you know what? Fuck that. This dude's got to go. The shit that he's doing is fucked up. We understand it's gonna slow down, business. It's gonna interfere with everything. We're gonna lose some people. They're gonna take some contraband, but we got to get rid of this dude because he was just causing too much chaos. And the thing about it that didn't help is a lot of the times he'd be with other COs searching cells, and they wouldn't do nothing about it. They wouldn't try to pull him to the side and be like, "Hey man, come on, man, that's not necessary." They'd start laughing and they'd start tripping on the dude himself. They'd be like, "Damn, this fool's on one," but they wouldn't say nothing. So, it got to that point where he had to go. So from what Psycho told me, that there was a CO one time that was close to some kind of booth that he was working in, a control booth or something, and the CO overheard him yelling on the phone. Because he was yelling on the phone. He was like, "I'm not gonna give you half of my fucking shit. You don't deserve half of what I got. I bought all that shit. I own the house. That car is mine." And he was putting all his personal business out there. But apparently what was happening is he was involved in a toxic divorce, and his wife was trying to take him for everything he had, and he was going crazy. Dude was losing his mind. He basically did. He started taking his personal problems to work with them, and he started looking for a way to get rid of that negative energy. And that's what ended up leading to him being stabbed. So eventually, what would end up happening is he would recover from his injuries. He was out for a while, like 6, 7 months. He milked it, stayed out, and then he would return back to work. But what happened is when he came back to work, he started getting caught up in a lot of excessive force incidents where he would end up stomping somebody out, and there were other COs that were with him when he'd have somebody socking him up against the wall, like he was just going in on cats trying to get his run backs. And eventually I ain't heard about it. They opened up an investigation. They would end up walking him off and firing him. They looked at him as he was a road cop. He was a road cop that was intentionally brutalizing inmates. That's what he was doing, and he was getting away with it. Obviously, when you got cops like that, a lot of them they'll pick their targets. They'll go after a lot of the weak inmates, and I guess that's what he was doing. But he would end up losing his job, and he would end up getting fired. But Yoda, he would obviously end up catching a shoe term. He did his shoe term. He got out. He ended up over there in high desert somewhere. And when that CO ended up, when he got fired, I guess he filed a lawsuit against Yoda, because Yoda, he couldn't go to the store. I don't know what the outcome of the case was, but he owed a shitload of restitution, and he couldn't go to canteen. So he might have lost, or they just, they did that because he was going back and forth to court. I don't know. So, like I told you guys early on in this story, when Yoda went to the shoot program, that's when he would end up getting made as a made Mexican Mafia member. So Guero Caballo was the one that sponsored him. We'll just go with that. So after he went to the shoot program, apparently he went up to High Desert, and he was up there in High Desert programming for a while. And apparently somebody hit some good meth, some good crystal up there. He took a couple of, I don't know if he shot it, but he took a couple of monster, shots, and ended up getting twacked out, all to the point where they put him on suicidal watch. They ended up putting him on suicide watch. And while he was on suicide watch, I guess he made some statements to IGI about, he was willing to debrief. And even though he would end up getting his bearings back, and he didn't debrief, the damage was done. I don't know how it happened, but other Sureños, they heard him make those statements, and that would obviously lead to the end of his career. So he's probably out there on the SNY yard now somewhere, maybe in Mill Creek. I don't know, but that's basically what happened. Anyways, I just wanted to get this one out to you guys tonight. I know it was kind of dry. Trust and believe. Just trust me on this. I got some bangers coming out over the next couple of days. You guys are going to trip out on some of the stories that I was able to get. But Anyways, you guys, I'm gonna go ahead and cut this one right here. I know this one was kind of dry. I got some other ones on deck that you guys are gonna like. Trust me, there's some bangers. But like I said earlier in the beginning of this video, for those of you that won the raffle, you guys need to get it either me or Sandman and send us your mailing information so we can get that stuff out to you guys. I'll try to get you guys out an Inner Demons tomorrow. If not, I'll try to get out 2 videos to you guys by Friday. We got a lot of stuff that we're working on to get out to you guys. I got an overwhelming amount of content that I don't know what to do. Trust me. It's coming in. It keeps coming in. And I'm going to keep putting it out there. If you guys got any stories on the Mexican Mafia that you want to share, I will compensate you for sharing them with me. You will not be, you will remain anonymous. And, like I said, I'll compensate you guys. So help us put the message out. You guys got any stories? You've been around them. You've done time. You'll remain anonymous, and I'll compensate you for your time. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and cut this one. I hope you guys had a good day. It's your boy B, and I'm out.